I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Maryland law requires school districts to be open for at least 180 days and, not or, 1,080 hours every school year. The January 2026 snowstorm closed MCPS for 5 consecutive days, which meant that the school district needed to make up the gap. MCPS said it would extend the end of the school year by 2 days and take back the Eid holiday and another non-instructional grading day. News of the cancellation of Eid caused a furor in Montgomery County's Muslim community as it was going into the holy month of Ramadan. Under pressure, MCPS backed out and moved instead to extend the end of the school year in June by 5 full days, which created an even bigger backlash. MCPS then sought a third play. The school district was having trouble complying with the 180-day school year requirement for a few years now, and in fall 2025 had convinced the county's legislative delegation to Annapolis to sponsor new legislation to drop the 180-day requirement altogether and only keep the 1,080-hour requirement. Not for the entire state of Maryland, but for Montgomery County Public Schools alone. MCPS had buy-in from the Board of Education and the Montgomery County Education Association, the teachers' union. Now, in the aftermath of Snowcrete, this was an emergency. On MCPS's recommendation, the delegation moved the new law for emergency consideration in the Assembly so that the school district would not have to bother with making up the lost days this school year. The legislation passed the House of Delegates unanimously and is now with the Senate, where it is expected to pass and become law. There is a Senate hearing on the bill scheduled for March 24th. The move to save MCPS from having to make unpopular decisions has had universal consensus among the county's elected officials. But one voice in the county has stood out. Evelyn Chung is an MCPS parent and an official in the county PTA body called the Montgomery County Council of PTAs, or MCCPTA. From her vantage point as a member of MCCPTA's education committees, Chung has argued that letting MCPS off the hook for the lost days defeats the school district's primary mission of education and is counterproductive, especially because the school district put itself in this position with poor decisions. She says that MCPS has abandoned the legal and constitutional standard of operational impact in determining when to close schools for religious holidays. To take a deep dive in school calendaring choices, stay with us. And before we go, a disclaimer. Evelyn Chung says that she speaks for herself and not MCCPTA. I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from the Baltimore woodwind wizard Seth Keibel. The songs come from his album No Words. Seth Keibel himself on clarinet, flute, and tenor saxophone, Sean Lane on piano, Scott Giambusso and Bob Abbott double bass, Sammy Arifin guitar, Mark Carson and Wes Crawford drums, The album was recorded and mixed by Blake Alphen. You can find Seth Keibel's music at sethkeibel.com. Evelyn Chung, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
MCPS has been struggling with snow days and makeup days. What's going on?
We lost 5 days of instruction this year because of snow days. Snowcrete was sort of an unusual storm, but this is not unpredictable. Even if we don't have a major storm, Montgomery County does not seem prepared to deal with any kind of ice or snow event. So even when there's 2 inches of snow, we've had snow closure. It's actually not atypical for MCPS to get 4 or 5 days off. Even as days get warmer, our county seems ill-prepared to handle it. And so we get ice on the road and suddenly we're closed for the whole day. So I think we can foresee, even with climate change and more extreme weather events, that this is not going to change, right? Like we're typically going to get a few days of snow every year. Maryland state law requires that our schools have a minimum number of school days and a minimum number of school hours. In the last couple of years, last year and this year, because of snow days and the way that MCPS builds our calendar, we have not been able to make that 100-day, 80-day minimum without extending the year into June. What's actually changed is how MCPS prepares for it. They typically have more instructional days already built in, so you have more leeway before you hit the 180-day state minimum of instructional days. They also plan their makeup days. They used to plan them more in the spring, so that when we needed them after, your first snowfall, so that we could actually use them. And now they've sort of shifted into throwing them at the end of the year when, it's less helpful for instruction. And a lot of people have already made plans. And in addition, MCPS did not use certain state waivers that the state provided. Like they could have, for example, brought us back in for President's Day or Easter Monday, as other school districts in Maryland have opted to do, but they didn't do that. So as a result, to get around the state law and the state waiver process, MCPS, along with the Teachers Union, MCEA, and the Board of Education, proposed at least last October to have a statute, like a Maryland statute, that applies only to MCPS and would allow MCPS to satisfy the state mandate so long as they met the school hours requirement, which they do. And they would then be allowed to have as few as 175 school days without having to get a waiver.
Maryland code says that you have to meet both the day requirements and the hour requirements. And the question now is, because they don't meet the day requirements, they want to meet just the hour requirements.
The state requirement has both school hours and school days. Our school hours definition is a lot more broad than other states. So it includes lunchtime, testing, everything from bell to bell. So we differ from other states in that sense because it's not defined what instructional hours are. It's like a belt and suspenders approach to make sure that kids get, ample instructional days. But there also is a difference in the function. So especially for your younger years, but for everyone really, you don't want to squish all your instruction into long days, right? There's only so much that kids can absorb in a day, which is why, then you'll see schools adding in some other things, right, during your school day to break it up. And especially for the little ones, that repetition and the rhythm really matters. So you want to have not just a certain number of hours, but you want it spread out in a consistent way. And the other thing that, you want is, and where MCPS's calendar has some issues is that, the first half of our year, they have a lot of 4-day weeks. I think half of the weeks before January are just 4-day weeks. So that creates a problem in terms of setting up a rhythm of instruction. So those are the kinds of things that instructional days accounts for over hours.
There is an argument, the literature in education says that instructional time is super important to learning. How does that frame this question of whether or not to have more instructional days or fewer instructional days?
If MCPS were centering student learning, they clearly see like our achievement has been on the decline for many years. We are in a state of crisis. I don't know any other way to say this. I mean, half our students and fewer than a third of our students receiving free and reduced price meals are meeting state literacy targets. In algebra, only less than 30% of our students are passing algebra on the state assessments, right? And if you're looking at students who receive farms, that's under 10%. That is abysmal. I mean, we should all be ashamed of it, right? And I sit through all these Board of Ed meetings and everyone's sad and, thoughts and prayers, but that it's your actions that matter. So we already know our students are behind. We already know from the pandemic and other like national studies, right, that instructional time matters, that if you reduce instructional time, student achievement, student outcomes suffer. On top of that, we know that disproportionately impacts our students receiving services like ESOL services, special ed, free and reduced meals, and it also disproportionately impacts our Black and Hispanic students, right? So it's really important. Most states, I think 30 states have a minimum of 180 days of instruction. Some states have even more. I think Kansas has as much as 185 or 186 days requirement. Because we're on this sort of legacy agrarian calendar, that 180 days came because you can't go that far into summer. Although I will say many states have started to start school way earlier. And part of that has been to accommodate the fact that your AP exams are in May, state assessments are in May. And so you really want to front load that instruction. And not just instruction, but that time to acclimate to the teachers and students. On top of that, and people have pointed this out, even with that 180 days, I mean, MCPS has sort of gotten known for like these days that aren't real days, early release days, days that end up, you go to high school and it's SAT day and nobody else actually has classes, right? Random days where, where suddenly you'll find out my child isn't supposed to go to school. So it's actually less than 180 days in practice, like usable days of instruction. MCPS is trying to do some initiatives that are based on research to get students up to grade level. And that includes adopting new curriculum in literacy and math that is at grade level. It is harder than what we're used to. It is a lot. Like the new elementary curriculum, teachers are already saying this is a lot, and it means that social studies time and science time is being eaten into. So every hour is precious. Next year, the state has mandated 60 minutes of math every day from K through 8, right? The state has based that on research again too. The research is clear. Instructional time matters, and it will help our students to learn the content that they need to learn and learn the skills that they need to learn.
States that have 185 instructional days, do they actually see better results?
Well, it's hard to tell because, again, 30 states all have the same minimum, right? So there's no real control group. And then a few have more days. But there's so many factors because it's not just the days, but how you use them. So, but I will say that, so Arcola Elementary had, this is an interesting case study. They actually, people don't understand, but the innovative school calendar, which also has year-round school, also has additional days of instruction. I think it was about 30. And so the outcomes at Arcola were better than other schools. But notably, there was another school, Roscoe Nix, right, that also had innovative school calendar, and their scores really weren't that much better, right? So they closed, so MCPS ended that program. There were a couple things there, right? They did a year-round school, but then they also added days. But it also showed that adding those days is not enough. It's how you implement them. And it's also our kids actually coming in on those days. So if you schedule days on extra instructional time, but families don't actually end up sending their kids in because it's too hard, which is what's happening sometimes at the innovative school calendar days. Or here, right? If you're suddenly opening school up in the last week of June, but nobody comes, and the teachers are just doing movies, I mean, that's not going to be valuable. So it's really how you use the time that matters. But I don't think you'll find one study that can really isolate that factor because all of the states have basically the same.
This is a huge problem in trying to understand what educational initiatives work and what don't. There are so many variables that are involved. Families that are not versed in education research are listening. They go, what's the big deal? You're going to add 3 days and they're going to watch movies anyway.
Yeah, and I don't think this is about the 3 days in June. This is really about MCPS's overall planning. If you look at how it's evolved since 2016 in the last decade, a lot of things have changed. The first is that we used to have 184 instructional days, so that if you had snow days, it would actually take a few before you'd have to worry about the minimum. Now, as of this year, for the first year, we have as low as 181 days only. Last year, we had 182. We added a transition day, which we lost our instructional day. So as a result, we don't have a lot of wiggle room. And then the other thing is that they used to build in more makeup days in the spring after the season when snow might begin, but before June when testing's already over, so it doesn't really help with instruction. And that has shifted. This year, we only had 2 days that were in that spring period. One was Eid, and everybody knows that ended up being canceled. And then the other makeup day actually was a grading and reporting day, which is required by the teachers union contract. So I'm not really sure why they scheduled it that day anyway, unless they were willing to use it and take whatever consequences there are in the contract. So they didn't use either of those days, which is another reason why the state Department of Ed didn't grant their waiver.
Just to clarify, they need to budget ahead for possible snow days, but they have to come after winter, which is only in spring. If you have these budgeted days ahead in the fall, that doesn't really make help at all.
There's 2 ways you do this. One is you already just have more instructional days, like go more over the 180 days. And honestly, it's not wasted effort. I mean, our kids, 70% of our kids are failing algebra standards. If we had a few more days in the early part of the year, that would help. If they could do that in a number of ways. Breaks could be shorter. Some of the extra holidays they've added over the years, we could rethink. I mean, seriously rethink. We could start the year a little earlier. So there's ways to build that in. And then the second piece is, where are our makeup days? It makes no sense at all to have makeup days in October and November. They're not snowing in October and November. And by the time we realize that we need more makeup days, those days have passed.
What was the controversy over Eid before it was resolved?
A couple of years ago, we started adding more cultural and religious holidays. And this is not to say that, we shouldn't respect cultural and religious holidays. It's really not about any one holiday, but it's how we're choosing which days to take off. You can go back to, I think, 2000, about 10 years ago, I found a memo from Superintendent Joshua Starr explaining that under our policy, IDA, and actually under constitutional law, the school can only make school closure decisions based on secular, non-religious reasons, based on secular, operational, and educational needs. And of course, I think people will wonder, well, we get certain Christian holidays off, we get Passover, Rosh Hashanah, but it's been very clear when the superintendent in the past has submitted their proposals to the board, they've made clear that was based on data, on information about expected absenteeism. If a large number of your teachers or staff or students aren't going to be in school that day anyway, because religious holidays are excused absences, of course, as they should be, then that's an operational concern. It's a safety concern. It's an instructional concern. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur historically were added back in the 70s because of high absenteeism. And I think the data was still supporting at least a decade ago. At that time, they were monitoring the data for Eid, and they said that they didn't think the absenteeism rates, because you can follow that because there's excused absences, so you can predict, okay, this is how many people were absent on those days. At that time, Superintendent Starr said they were monitoring it. That would be a reason to start adding some other holidays. But notably, they don't actually cite that in their memo, and they've added a number of cultural and religious holidays like Lunar New Year, Diwali, that have not historically resulted in high absenteeism. And I think the reasoning that some folks in the community have given is that, well, if we had the day off, we might actually celebrate it. But I don't know if that actually passes snuff under IDA, because your decision making has to really be operational. Certainly if I have a day off, we'll do a lot of things on my day off, but that's very different from saying, we know that staff will not come in. We know that students will come in.
The county is more diverse. Is that operational standard, right? That operations be affected, which is attendance is low. Is that the only standard?
Yes, I think actually it's a constitutional issue too, because there's a Supreme Court case that talks about how schools have to make these kinds of decisions under Lemon v. Kurtzman, and I think there's a District of Maryland case too. The school system, the state agency can't pick and choose holidays, and you can see why you get a slippery slope, because then the question is well, why did you pick this holiday versus somebody else's holiday? And there's multiple. I mean, there's many religious holidays even within one religion. So how do you decide which one is the one that you take a day off in, right? Passover, we don't get off. And then the problem that happened this year then was once they had created that as a holiday and this expectation, then when there was a snow day and they needed to use it as a makeup day, there was backlash because it felt very biased, right? So now you're just inviting, instead of if you're not using these very secular operational reasons that are data-based, then you're opening yourself up to criticism that you're biased. And that backlash was quite predictable. For years, they said, well, we can't really add days. And there really wasn't any room to add closures because of Hogan's, our governor back then had this sort of restriction in which we had to start after Labor Day and end by June 15th. Once that was lifted, there was some opening to start earlier, which then gave them some more flexibility in the calendar. But you'll see that under Dr. McKnight, even though she added days off that were holidays, they all coincided with other operational closures. She did add, I think, Eid, but they aligned with grading and reporting days that they had to take off anyway. So Dr. Taylor is the first one to actually, in his memo to the board, list religious and cultural holidays, but cite no operational reason for closing on those days and not aligning with any other operational reason. So the situation we're in is actually a new one that has been created only this year.
The Muslim community is extraordinarily grateful that it has had broad political support to make sure that Eid remains a holiday.
I do feel for the Muslim community. It probably feels quite targeted. This was a foreseeable backlash. If you're choosing a date based on operational reasons, it probably doesn't make sense to use it as instructional reasons. If they had said this is a day that has high absenteeism and that's why it's closed, then they probably should not have reopened it if they already know that it's going to be a date of high absenteeism. But if it doesn't have that operational reason, then of course they're going to get backlash because they don't have a reason. And so the more that you ground your decisions in like operational reasons, educational reasons, then yes, people might not be happy, but you can actually explain it. And then most parents, I think, would accept it, right? Here, they didn't do that. They just sort of, it's very reactive. So people protested and then they went back on it. And then now we're all in June where more people are unhappy with that, right? So, they're trying to cater to all these different groups. And really, they just need to ground it in what is the best plan for our students and then stick with it.
The proposition to reconsider religious holidays and look at their organizational impact, the absenteeism, and reverting to a different standard now, that has political costs. Because I think the folks, the communities that have been given these holidays are now going to really be upset if you take it away from them.
I don't know that, does Dr. Taylor actually care what people think of him? I mean, given some of the things he's been doing this year with the regional program and Wooten, and I'm not sure that he's, as we all saw, like he sort of had decided that what's the worst they can do is fire me. It's very clear that policy IDA actually does not allow the school system to make choices for religious and cultural days unless there's an operational reason. So, following the policy and avoiding a lawsuit seems a pretty strong argument. I mean, I think people might be upset, but they will understand, right? The other thing that they could do is really look at this calendar, and what I think under the last superintendent, what they did was they aligned those holidays. It was actually kind of clever. They aligned the holidays with grading and reporting days. And grading and reporting days really are sacrosanct because they're built into the collective bargaining agreement. You can't really get rid of them. So then there isn't this problem that they're going to be suddenly pulled the rug out under everybody, and now this religious holiday is now is a makeup day.
What is the status of the bill in the Maryland General Assembly? I think it's HB 1084.
Yes, so it was passed almost unanimously by the House of Delegates. So now it is being considered by the Maryland Senate. And I think March 24th is the hearing date, and they are taking, public testimony from folks, written or oral. Now, if the Senate could not pass it, but then amend it, and then I think it would have to go back to the House of Delegates.
It seems that there is widespread support for allowing MCPS to move from counting days and hours to just counting hours. Who is against that?
The way that this issue began and was presented is really focused on what happens in a snow emergency, and we don't want, school to be extended till June. What I haven't seen from anybody, MCPS, the teacher, is to sort of stepping back and saying, well, how did we get here? And is there a bigger issue here? And when I've spoken to people and explained, okay, it's not just about this calendar, but it's about how are we structuring our instructional days, period. A lot of teachers would say, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think everyone agrees that instruction needs to occur more before June, whether there's a snow year or not. And so the calendar has kind of gotten out of hand. And when I explain that to folks, it shifts how they see this issue. And I think that's the framing I wish that our leadership would kind of start having and getting our community to understand. Like if you tell somebody, listen, 70% of you are going to fail, of your kids are going to fail algebra. 70%. That's just like, you're not going to make state requirements. Half of your kids might be in danger, third graders might be in danger starting in 2027 of either being left behind or having to repeat third grade or take extra interventions that MCPS will have to pay for. Then that frames things a little bit differently. Like once people start to realize, yes, I do want this day off. Like a lot of people want a lot of things. And when you're asked, like, do you want these things? They'll say yes. But if you're being told, but the problem is we have to make a balance. And the reality is most people will say that the primary focus should be on making sure our kids are at grade level and that they're getting the instruction they need and that they're not going to have to repeat third grade. I think once people start framing it that way, they see the big picture issue. But the way that it's been framed right now has been just the fear of like extending into June. But there's a better way to just do the whole calendar.
Yes, but also there's a big picture issue about there being too much testing and the testing being not so useful.
That is an issue too. And I'm on the district assessments committee. And so that's been another area where a number of the MCCPTA have been trying to push back. But folks should understand that like that assessments, like we are maxing out on there's a 2% maximum, like only 2% of your instructional time can be used for assessments. And like in a lot of the grade levels, especially elementary, we are hitting that max. And we do hear teachers complain about that too. What I have noticed is that once some of us do suggest not using this assessment or another, I've been surprised. I've had teachers, like we started to question, do we need 3 math tests in a year, right? Or do we need this map if we have this other exam? And even teachers sometimes were pushing back. So that's, again, another conversation is how much time we use on assessments. As well as like when you have an assessment, like in high school, if you have an MCAP or an SAT, why is the rest of school have no instruction whatsoever? You have to decide based on what your main mission is, which is we have to close this achievement gap. We have to improve student achievement. Like our students need to be ready for college. They can't be taking remedial classes in college, right? And cost millions of dollars a year, right?
And 5 extra days of instruction is going to achieve that. I
mean, maybe not in June, but yes, I do think that like if you have a better rhythm in the first part of the year, I mean, MCPS rolled out a much stronger curriculum for elementary, right? CKLA. It is hard. The reason why it's hard is because for years we've not actually had grade level instruction. It's been below grade level. So it's a big change. And, teachers have already said, like, the pacing is hard. It's not what they're used to. It's been adjusted. Like, we do not teach the full curriculum. And that goes to a lot of curricula in a lot of subject areas. So that week really does matter. I mean, if you're studying, a lot of parents whose kids are also studying for, like, the APs exams are like, this is, they need to get through this before the AP exam. And then I hear, students whose teachers have said, okay, we're doubling up assignments. And that's very stressful, too. Right. And keep in mind, too, these are big picture issues we're seeing in high school. For example, one of the other big things that MCCPTA has been looking at is the fact that students are no longer assigned reading in a lot of classes. So for English, and so they're not getting the volume of reading that they're supposed to. They're doing the reading in the classroom. So now that really compounds the problem. If you're not reading enough outside the classroom and you're only reading in the classroom and then you lose those 5 days, that's quite a bit of stuff that you've lost. I know it seems like only a week, but it's really about how are we making these decisions? Because that 180-day limit, there's not exactly a whole lot of science. There's a lot of research that says that more days are better. Definitely. Year-round would probably be better, right? So 180 days is basically what states determined was like the maximum number of your days that you can fit into the calendar, on a typical school year. And, once you take out all the traditional holidays and like some days for grading and professional. So the ideal number probably is higher than 180 days. Some states have more actually.
The new law also covers next school year, that is 26-27, not just 25-26.
Yes. So, and that's also a problem.
Why?
Well, because the original statute that they proposed was permanent. I mean, that's what I think families don't understand. This is not just about fixing this year's snow emergency, and that's the way it's been conveyed to the public, but it's not. The teachers union this last year, the Board of Education and the superintendent all have been pushing for a permanent reduction in school days, since at least last fall. It's in their legislative priorities, and their legislative priorities do not limit it to this year, and they don't, they mean they want this permanently. So it will start with this statute, but there's also a likelihood that not only does it extend to next year, but it might continue beyond that.
The law, does that extend beyond 26-27 or just 26-27?
The original bill actually was only supposed to start next year, and it was supposed to be permanent. But after Snowcrete, they rallied to have it be decided on an emergency basis and apply to this year. And then I think because it's emergency, they said, okay, well, let's just apply it only to next year. We will cut it off then. But its likelihood is if it gets passed now, and if folks don't start speaking up, that they will then probably pass another bill that, like the original, that will be permanent.
What about a shift to virtual learning for the period that snow is not letting you out of the house? That's another type of solution. MCPS didn't have that either, right?
No, they didn't, and they used to. So, and I'm not a huge fan of virtual learning. I wouldn't want it to be the main contingency plan, because I think what we experienced was that, MCPS tried these asynchronous virtual days that were terrible, right? It's a big burden on the parents. It's a hard burden on teachers, especially teachers who also have school-age kids. And often not a lot of learning was done anyway. That being said, not just for snow, but for things like pandemics, every school system should have contingency plans for longer term enclosures. So other school districts says, hey, after 3 days of closures, we're going to revert to virtual learning, especially 3 consecutive days. We do have a virtual academy. People don't realize this. We still actually do have a remnant of a virtual academy that's gotten way better at this. And it's not what people think. It's not the kids online, all that, they're working with tangible books. And that was always our goal. So, virtual learning is an option. It should have been an option after 3 days. I'm not saying it should be the option for every single snow day, but we should be like every other school district, which is that, something is better than nothing. And a virtual day when you need it is still better than a June day when no one's going to show up.
Evelyn Chung, thank you.
Thank you.
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from the Baltimore woodwind wizard, Seth Keibel. The songs come from his album, No Words. Seth Keibel on clarinet, flute, and tenor saxophone. Sean Lane on piano. Scott Giambuso and Bob Abbott on double bass, Sammy Arafin guitar, Mark Carson and Wes Crawford drums. The album was recorded and mixed by Blake Alfin. You can find Seth Keibel's music at sethkeibel.com. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.